My fourth strategy of building your brand is to consider blogging. Now you may say, well, why bother? I'm not a writer. I didn't go into this business to publish stuff. But increasingly, we are being told as businesses to create content. Things that we can talk about in and around our business. And I'm going to give you a few reasons why I think it's worth considering blogging. First of all, it's free, which is a good start. It's not free in terms of your time. It's very time consuming, but it's a free platform through which to demonstrate what you know, and also to convey and to communicate your distinctive personality. It's a way of putting yourself across and yourself out there. And of course, because it's online, it's eminently spreadable. So if you create a really insightful article, maybe a white paper or a top 10 list of this, that and the other, or a piece of research that you've done, if it's embraced by the people who like what you're doing, your tribe, your network, your band of followers, they will be the people who will spread it for you. And because of the speed and reach of social media now, it's very possible to get your message out there to a much wider number of people than it could ever have done before. But it requires you to produce something in the first place that's worth paying attention to. Also, Google really likes this kind of stuff because it's really looking for fresh, original, authentic, well-written and relevant content. So the more things you can find to write about that enhance your professional standing, the more likely you are to be found and ranked highly by Google. Because at the end of the day, people like to read good stuff, and Google knows how long people are spending on your site, and it knows if your stuff is being forwarded on to other people. But of course, it requires A, that you produce something that's really good, and B, that you build the relationships with people where it's more likely that they will then forward it onto their networks. And I think finally an impact or a benefit that's often overlooked or not even understood in the first place is something that Seth Godin, my marketing hero, highlighted a while ago. That's Seth pictured on the right there. He has one of the world's most followed blogs and has been blogging for several years now on a regular basis. He was once asked, what's the purpose or what's the real benefit of small businesses engaging in blogging? And he said, well, it's not really the number of people who are reading it, the number of people who are following you. That's what you might think it would be highly valued. The main benefit, in his opinion, of blogging is the impact that it has on the writer. It's the fact that it forces you to become more curious about the world around you, to think through your ideas, to figure things out, to become more interested, to become more skilled in packaging those ideas and communicating those ideas and seeing the value in those ideas to your audience. That's the real impact that it has, in his view. I think it's got some drawbacks as well. I mentioned before that it's extremely time consuming. And often if you're writing for other publications, because people obviously will sometimes carry your material as well and forward it onto their networks, which is fantastic. But they quite often say, well, could you give us something that's really original? Because Google, again, doesn't really like the same content being seen in lots of different, blogs and websites. It's nice that if you come up with something really original that doesn't appear anywhere else. But that's quite time consuming. There's also lots of competition. There are millions and millions of blogs, many hundreds of thousands being created every day. So there's an awful lot of stuff out there. And for you to cut through that noise and be, read and listened to and forwarded on requires, again, that you produce something that's very well written, that's very insightful, and probably quite personal as well. That helps enormously. And finally, people often struggle to find enough things to talk about. It's a little bit like, being a journalist in a town where nothing interesting ever happens. You've got to find stuff to say all of the time because the necessity to produce material doesn't stop, but sometimes it's easy to run dry. And that's where it's important to spread your perspective a little bit to start thinking a bit more metaphorically and to find different ways of saying the same thing or different aspects of the same niche to talk about. Just a few other tips. It's important, I think, to find your niche. Decide what it is that you want to be known for, and that's the thing you write about. Newsjacking is a really interesting idea. This is the notion that you can jump on the back of a current news story, something that's in the public domain at the time. The gentleman pictured there is James Alexander Gordon. Now, for those football fans amongst you, you may recognise the name because he used to read the football results out on a Saturday afternoon. For years and years and years he's done this, and he retired recently. And I mentioned his name at a BNI event a while ago, and I mentioned it in relation to the use of the voice, because James Alexander Gordon had a particular way of telling or communicating the football results, because he changed the tone and the pitch of his voice. So it would be, Manchester United 4, Tottenham Hotspur. And you knew that because his voice went down when he said Tottenham Hotspur, they would have a lower score. So you almost knew what the result was going to be. So that's obviously of interest to me, because in terms of communication, it's not just what you say, it's the way that you say it and the way you use your voice, which is critical. So I was able to use a news story around him retiring as a lead-in to talking about how you change the pitch and tone of your voice. I think it's important to broaden your scope as well, and broadening your scope within your niche, they seem to be two conflicting ideas. But it's about finding different ways of, or different aspects of what you're doing to talk about. And an example would be, I met a guy recently at a networking event who ran a chain of dry cleaners. And we were talking about this idea of blogging and creating content. And he said, well, that's all very well, Andrew, but how on earth do I make dry cleaning sound interesting? What do I talk about in dry cleaning? And I thought for a moment, and I thought, well, hang on a minute. Every garment that's brought into your stores has a story behind it. It was bought for a reason in the first place, it was ruined in a particular circumstance, and there's a reason why it has to be ready for 3 o'clock tomorrow. So it's the context in which that garment was brought in that's really interesting. That's the story behind the garment. I think also you can position your material strategically, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes when we're discussing social media. But also, rather like speaking, it's a case of practicing and developing your skill over time. The more you write, the more you begin to hone the skill of communicating in that way, so that your articles are concise, they're precise, they're written in a way which conveys your unique tone of voice, your particular ways of saying things, and after a while they get spread, and they are a great way of helping you stand out and pull people towards you who like your ideas.